The gift within this stage, within SRI, which is really powerful, is how do you learn how to be with the stuckness? Because the more that you can be present and be with things, that's when the transformation can actually happen. Rather than resisting or avoiding, right? What you resist persists. The more we can actually just be with it and surrender, which I get is uncomfortable, but the more we can surrender and connect in that way and kind of just sit with it at the dinner table, as we talk about, the more it can actually transform. So we're going to be talking about how to utilize that stuck energy, pain, and tension and use that as fuel to transform, which is that transition point in the stages and the seasons between the season of discover, which is stages 1 through 3, a little bit of 4, into the season of transform, which is all about making change, taking action, saying the way things are, enough is enough. So actually what I should mention too is there is a lot of stage 4 energy. You might see that on social media. You might hear that in people's voices. You know, I'm sick of the way the healthcare system is handling it. Enough is enough. We need to do something different. Once we get through this pandemic and this crisis, we need to do something different, right? We need to stop reacting to things and only putting money into crisis care. What would happen if someone took that bound energy and that anger and used it to make change within a system? Remember, your body is a system, the educational system, the healthcare system, employers, employees, all of that. What if we took some of that bound, stuck energy in those old patterns and said, you know what? Rather than projecting this onto people and blaming and going back to stage 1 and 2, what if I took that and I made change and said, what would it look like to take a lot of the dollars that we're putting into health insurance and, you know, reactive care and crisis care and actually put it into caring for people and having people actually have access to holistic care in a more sustainable fashion? Because listen, I get it. Holistic care and this type of work is not always cheap. And insurance companies don't understand. They only want to cover so much. Unless you're in pain, we're not covering it. Unless you're in crisis mode, we're not covering it. But that's not how health works. Health is a process. The coronavirus doesn't happen overnight. It's been a process. It's been happening. But you see in the world now, we are in crisis, panic, reactive, cortisol, and fluctuation mode. So that's what this stage and this transition is all about, is rather than going back into blame and shame and suffering, how do we actually move forward and evolve? How do we actually move into a state of transform where anger serves us? Anger in this transition is very important to connect to. We don't want to numb our emotions. We want to actually use them as an opportunity to make change. And that doesn't mean projecting them onto others or making other people wrong, but taking responsibility for your own actions, taking responsibility for your own emotions, and knowing that challenges are part of life. Stress and tension is part of life. Even after this all, this is temporary, right? I hope you all agree and believe that this is all temporary. But there's going to be something else that emerges in the future, right?
Yeah, I guess in 4 years.
Yes, 4 years.
Yeah, another one, another eruption.
Exactly.
What was the one before this?
Wasn't it Ebola or something?
Swine flu, H1N1, bird flu,
It's gonna be an hour down the line.
There's a bunch of them.
So what my point with that is, thank you for sharing, we clearly see there's a cycle and there's a rhythm. There's cycles and rhythms and seasons to life. So how can we continuously keep working on ourselves, which I know all of you leaders do? How can we continuously keep working on ourselves where in moments like this, rather than us going into that reactive state with people, how can we, not from an egotistical place, but how can we actually just stay strong as leaders and say, you know what? I understand and I get your panic and I get your frustration and I get this, and this is what I'm doing differently this time. Come 2024, what are you going to do differently as a result of working on yourself? What are you going to do differently because you've done this type of work to show up differently? And benefit of all this, the more you can just connect with your body, the stronger your immune system gets. So with this transition, it's all about taking the stuck energy and finding the courage. So I've talked about that hierarchy of consciousness or that hierarchy of emotions. David Hawkins for my mom taking notes, maybe Tim taking notes. David Hawkins, if you've heard of his work, Power versus Force, he talks about the levels of consciousness and the levels of energy and the levels of emotion. So we have the lower, lower, not necessarily worse, but just lower, which is fear, blame, shame. Then we get into control. The flip into the higher stages of consciousness or emotional processing happens at the level of courage. So this is when you move from fear to anger, stage 2, kind of stuck, angry, frustrated with yourself, like, oh, I'm the common denominator. When you can take that and flip it into taking your courage and your power and your strength back, that actually starts to move into the higher states of consciousness. Same thing with stage 3 into stage 4. So we're going to be activating courage, activating our power, and really here in that bridge, there's no turning back. When you're feeling this energy in your body, you just want to keep being with it. And again, remember, those of you who I've taught this class to before, remember the importance of building a baseline. Having the breath moving through your body, being flexible, because as we do stage 4, there's going to be more energy moving in your system. And that's what's needed in the season of transform. When you're consistently making change, when you're consistently making progress, when you're consistently wanting to get out into the world, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're like starting businesses or movements, but just being a strong person, of an agent of change, as Donnie calls it, it takes energy, right? It takes a different level of energy to stand strong in those conversations. When maybe you want to be that person that alters the conversation to not talk about the coronavirus, it takes energy to do that, right? It's easy to kind of just default. So how can we move and connect to that energy in our body to have it show up in our life? So as I mentioned, this new season, it takes that momentum. It takes connecting to it in our body. It takes courage, power, and strength. Courage, power, and strength are the 3 emotions and words we're going to be using a lot, at least in stage 4. A couple subtleties when it comes to stage 4 energy. So as we're building momentum in our body, and you'll notice this with the breathing changes. So we've been breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth in our work. Now we're going to breathe nose, nose. And you and I were talking about this too. We're going to breathe in through the nose and out through the nose, because as we do that, what we're doing is we're actually starting to activate somewhat of a sympathetic response, meaning fight or flight, but in a healthy way. So I'll take a step back for a second. When it comes to any sort of breathing or working with the nerve system, you have the sympathetic, which is fight or flight, and then you have the parasympathetic, which is rest and digest, healing, all of that. There are healthy sides to both of that. So for example, a healthy sympathetic response is productivity, getting stuff done, working towards a project, being athletic, being in that state of power and focus and determination and production, right? And when it gets to be unhealthy and too much sympathetic, that's when we start to fight or totally avoid situations. Now on the parasympathetic side, rest, digest, calm, healing, nurturing, that can also be taken to an extreme where there's avoidance. That's the flight. That's more the flight, like I can't handle this. Or there's a level of lethargy, not wanting to do anything. Like you don't have any energy to do anything. Like you can't activate the sympathetic if you even tried. So coming back, with stage 4, we will be activating the sympathetic nervous system a little bit. I should mention too, if you are teaching this to other people, if someone has not connected to their body and their pain and their traumas in the lower stages or whatever form of breath work you're teaching, this stage can be a little much for people who haven't had some baseline level of processing when it comes to trauma, okay? We don't want to bring people into a state of reliving their trauma, but rather helping them integrate it. And part of that integration is just building a solid foundation of safety in the body, which is more the nose-mouth breath. So I preface that because right now we are in a state, the culture is in a state of hypervigilance, which means we're very aware and we're very heightened. So I just want you to listen to your body. You know, when we're doing the exercise today, if it feels like it's too much, because maybe you are feeling more stressed out, just listen to your body. And what you can do is if you're feeling like it's overwhelming and too much, come back to just stage 1, nose, mouth, breath, okay? And that's not only today, but any other time you're doing this work. Now, when you're doing stage 4 and you're feeling that energy and the heat and the tension build and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm ready, let's go, enough is enough. Those are the affirmations at this stage. And you feel ready to have that breakthrough, like go with it. Just let that rhythm take over. Again, a lot of SRI is just trusting your body and listening, but also if you're new to the work, which, all of you have been doing this for a little bit of time. If you're new, sometimes there can be like confusion until you tap into your body's wisdom more. So back to stage 4, we're building that fire and we're building that fuel and we're taking that stuck, bound energy and we're going to start to move it more in our system. I'm going to bring you through stage 1, stage 3, stage 4, and then back to stage 3 so you can notice the difference. And we might complete with a stage 1 just to kind of round it out, okay? So we're building the fuel, building that baseline of sustainable change. In stage 4, which is the first stage that we're getting into that season of transform, in stage 4, you're not necessarily going to be taking a ton of action quite yet, but you're going to be feeling that energy like you want to. Have you all felt that? Like, I feel like I want to do something, but I don't really know what it is. Like, I feel like I want to change, and I feel like I'm ready for something different, but I don't really know quite yet what it is. That's stage 4. Stage 4, we need to build the energy. We need to, what's the term? Fuel the fire first, put the kindling in first, before we actually start to make change. Because what can happen is if we feel that energy and we take action too quickly that's out of alignment with our values, with our vision, with our mission, with our desires, generally we can get fatigued, our progress stops, or we keep hitting that wall, and then we're back into stage 3. Not that, again, the lower stages are bad, but you see, and I've mentioned this before, you see these people taking action, but they're not actually making any real progress in their life, right? They're still in the same spot, but it looks like they're taking action, but they're still like same belief patterns, same way of thinking, same way of doing, but it just looks like this is kind of the busy, like they're taking action, but the energy's all over the place and it's not being directed. When you can get into alignment with what you desire to happen for your life, for yourself, for the world, and then move into stage 4 and take action there, you would be surprised that, you take that action and so much more can happen, so much progress and sustainable progress, meaning when you make change, it stays. And then making change again and it stays. It's not this big up and down and up and down. And I'll pause. Does that make sense to you all, like what I'm talking about? Action versus progress? Cool.